Have you ever believed in something so deeply that it felt unquestionable, almost permanent, only to realize one quiet moment later that it was never true at all? Not shouted, not debated, just quietly accepted. For generations, there has been a soft but persistent assumption floating across boardrooms, universities, and financial districts in America. An assumption rarely said out loud, yet often felt. Filipinos are hardworking, yes. Loyal, yes. But power, influence, extreme wealth, those things belong to someone else. Someone louder, someone taller, someone born closer to the center of the world. People spoke as if everyone already agreed, as if history itself had made the decision. Filipinos were nurses, caregivers, engineers behind the scenes. Never the ones signing the checks. Never the ones shaping industries. Never the ones rewriting rules. And then something uncomfortable happened. Something that cracked that illusion just enough for the truth to leak through. A respected professor at a top American university once remarked in passing that Asian success stories were predictable. A narrow lane, safe professions, limited imagination. He said it casually, with confidence, as if the world had already proven him right. But what he did not know, what many did not know, was that across America, quietly and without permission, Filipino women were building something extraordinary. Not just careers, empires, not just wealth, power with purpose. This story begins not with a single name, but with a pattern that America overlooked for decades. Women born in Manila, Cebu, Davao. Women who grew up hearing prayers whispered before sleep, who watched their mothers stretch meals and their fathers carry dignity even when money was scarce. Women taught not to boast, not to demand attention, not to take up too much space. And yet, somehow, they crossed oceans and entered industries where space is everything. Some arrived in New York with nothing but an accent they were told to soften. Others landed in California when Silicon Valley still did not know how much it would one day depend on Asian minds. A few stepped into fashion houses that had never imagined a Filipina setting global trends. And one by one, against expectation, against silence, they rose. This is not a fairy tale. This is not overnight success. These women were questioned more than their peers, paid less before they were paid more, asked to prove themselves again and again, even after winning. They endured boardrooms where they were the only woman and often the only person of color. They were underestimated until underestimation became their greatest weapon. What makes this story different is not just the numbers in bank accounts or the companies attached to their names. It is how they carried their identity while doing it. They did not erase where they came from. They did not trade faith for ambition. Many of them kept the same quiet rituals, calling home, sending money back, attending Mass, teaching their children to say po and opo even in American kitchens. America often celebrates loud victories, but the rise of the richest Philippine women in America happened in a different register. Subtle, relentless, almost invisible until it was impossible to ignore. From high-fashion runways to semiconductor labs. From Wall Street trading floors to Silicon Valley boardrooms. These women did not ask for permission to belong. They built spaces where belonging was no longer a question. And perhaps the most powerful part is this. None of them set out to prove the world wrong. They simply refused to believe the world had already decided their limits. What followed was not just personal success, but a quiet reckoning. A realization that the Philippines had been exporting far more than labor. It had been exporting leadership, brilliance, and an unbreakable sense of purpose. As we begin this journey, keep one thought close. What if the story of Filipino success was never small, never hidden, never secondary? What if it was simply waiting for the moment when the world was finally ready to look directly at it? What the world rarely sees is the distance between where these women began and where they eventually stood. Before the boardrooms, before the headlines, before the figures that would one day stun even seasoned investors, there was a quieter chapter filled with strain, doubt, and moments when giving up felt like the most reasonable choice. Many of these women arrived in America carrying degrees that did not translate cleanly across borders. A diploma earned with sacrifice in the Philippines suddenly felt invisible. Some were told, gently but firmly, that their education was insufficient. Others were asked to start over, to repeat years of training, to accept positions far below their capability just to have a foot in the door. It was not uncommon for a woman who had ranked at the top of her class back home to find herself filing paperwork or running numbers no one else wanted to touch. The pressure was not only professional, families back home depended on them. Expectations were heavy but unspoken. Every paycheck carried the weight of siblings' tuition, medical bills, aging parents who believed their daughter had made it simply by arriving in America. Failure was not an option, yet success seemed deliberately distant. There were moments when the system itself felt closed. Corporate cultures that rewarded self-promotion clashed with values of humility. Accents became obstacles. Silence in meetings was mistaken for lack of intelligence rather than respect. One Filipina recalled being advised to speak louder, interrupt more, be more aggressive, as if confidence could be surgically implanted without cost. Another was told, with a smile, that leadership roles required a personality that did not come naturally to her. Some tried different paths, a move from New York to California, a leap from finance to tech, a detour into entrepreneurship after corporate doors refused to open fully. Not all attempts worked. Businesses failed. Promotions were promised and delayed. Years passed where progress felt invisible, where effort outpaced reward so dramatically it tested faith itself. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, something else was forming. A resilience shaped not by motivational speeches but by lived necessity. These women had grown up watching parents survive typhoons, political instability, and economic uncertainty. They understood endurance long before ambition. When doors closed, they did not break down. They adjusted. When voices were ignored, they listened harder, learned more, and waited for the precise moment to speak. Often, help came from unexpected places. A Filipino colleague who noticed their potential. A manager who saw results instead of stereotypes. A late-night conversation that turned into mentorship. Small mercies that arrived just when hope thinned. And quietly, networks formed. Not exclusive clubs, but bonds rooted in shared experience. Advice passed in hallways, job leads whispered over coffee, encouragement delivered in Tagalog, Ilocano, or Bisaya when English felt too sharp for the moment. Faith also played a role. Not as spectacle, but as grounding. Many carried childhood prayers into unfamiliar cities. Sunday Mass became a place to breathe, to remember who they were beyond performance reviews and quarterly targets. It reminded them that worth did not begin or end with a paycheck. By the time opportunity finally appeared, it did not feel like luck. It felt earned through patience that bordered on stubbornness. When one woman was finally trusted with a high-risk investment decision, she delivered returns that silenced doubt. When another was given a chance to lead a technical team, productivity soared. Skepticism gave way to reliance, and reliance, slowly, turned into authority. Still, even as the climb accelerated, none of them forgot how fragile progress once felt. The memory of struggle sharpened their decisions, It made them precise. It made them fearless in ways that could not be taught. Because when you have already survived being unseen, there is very little left to fear. The world would soon notice their success. But long before recognition arrived, the real transformation had already happened inside them. A quiet certainty that they belonged not because someone allowed it, but because they had built the strength to stand there themselves. There comes a moment in every long journey when movement finally gives way to meaning. For these women, that moment did not always arrive with applause or promotion. It arrived quietly, often unexpectedly, through a reconnection with something they thought distance had weakened. The Philippines was no longer just a memory left behind. It became present again, not as a place on a map, but as a force shaping how they stood, how they decided, how they led. Some felt it during short returns home, stepping out into Manila's heavy air after years of American efficiency and speed. The noise was louder than they remembered, the streets more chaotic, yet something inside them softened. They noticed how people still smiled even when life was visibly hard, how family conversations stretched for hours without agendas, how faith was not scheduled but lived. These visits did not slow them down, they clarified them. Others encountered the Philippines without boarding a plane. It appeared in Filipino communities scattered across America, in church halls where potluck tables overflowed and no one left hungry, in late-night conversations after Mass where advice was given freely without competition, in aunties who asked about work not out of comparison, but concern. These moments rebuilt something corporate life had quietly eroded, a sense of belonging that did not depend on achievement. And with that reconnection came a shift. The same woman who once doubted her voice began to trust it. Not because she had learned to be louder, but because she realized leadership did not require abandoning who she was. In meetings, she spoke with calm authority. She listened deeply. She made decisions that balanced profit with people. To the surprise of her peers, teams responded. Productivity increased. Loyalty deepened. Results followed. There were moments of contrast that stayed with them. In Western spaces, success often felt lonely, guarded, transactional. In Filipino spaces, even brief ones, success was shared, celebrated, prayed over. One executive recalled presenting a major deal on a Monday morning, then attending a small community gathering that same evening where no one asked about numbers, only about her well-being. That contrast reshaped her priorities without diminishing her ambition. Gradually, the internal narrative changed. Where once there was constant self-correction, now there was steadiness. Where once success felt like something that could be taken away, now it felt anchored. They realized that what made them effective leaders had been with them all along: the patience learned from waiting, the adaptability shaped by uncertainty, the empathy grown from seeing struggle up close. These were not weaknesses to overcome. They were advantages the world had failed to measure. The Philippines, in this sense, was not a fallback. It was the foundation. It explained why they endured longer, learned faster, and recovered quicker from failure. It explained why wealth, when it finally came, did not harden them. Instead, it widened their sense of responsibility. Many quietly mentored others, opened doors they once found closed, funded scholarships, supported causes tied not to image, but memory. And perhaps most telling was this: even as their names appeared in financial reports and industry rankings, they did not feel finished. Success no longer meant arrival, it meant alignment between who they had been, who they were becoming, and where they came from. In recognizing the Philippines again, Not as something to explain away, but something to stand on, these women crossed a different threshold, not just into influence, but into wholeness. The climb was no longer just upward, it was inward. And from that place, the impact they were about to make would be deeper than numbers alone could ever show. There is a moment when success stops feeling like survival and begins to feel like responsibility. For these women, that moment did not arrive with a press release or a sudden spike in net worth. It arrived quietly, almost humbly, when they realized that their rise was no longer only about them. Somewhere along the way, the climb transformed into a calling. By this stage in their journey, they were no longer fighting to be seen. They were being watched. Their decisions carried weight. Their presence shifted rooms. And yet, what defined this phase was not dominance, but depth. They led the way they had been raised, with care, with patience, with an awareness that people were not tools, but lives intersecting with their own. Many of them describe a strange calm that replaced the fear they once carried. The constant pressure to prove worth softened. In its place came clarity. They no longer mimicked leadership styles that felt foreign. They trusted their instincts. They created environments where people felt safe to speak, safe to fail, safe to grow. And something remarkable happened. Teams flourished, innovation increased, loyalty became unshakable. Outside the office, their transformation became even more visible. They returned to Filipino spaces not as strivers, but as anchors. In community halls, churches, and living rooms filled with laughter and food, they were no longer just daughters or professionals. They were examples. Not in a boastful way, but in the quiet way Filipinos recognize achievement. Through respect, through gratitude, through stories passed gently from one person to another. Faith deepened during this time. Not because life had become easy, but because it had become meaningful. Many spoke of moments standing in church, candles flickering, realizing how far they had come without losing who they were. The prayers they once whispered for survival turned into prayers of thanks, and often prayers of guidance, because with influence came difficult choices, and they did not want to lose their moral compass. What made this phase so powerful was the absence of bitterness. These women remembered the dismissals, the closed doors, the years of invisibility. But they did not lead with resentment. They led with understanding. They hired differently, mentored intentionally, listened deeply. When young Filipinas entered their orbit, uncertain and overwhelmed, they were met not with competition, but with recognition. A silent acknowledgement that said, "I know this road. You do not walk it alone." There were moments that brought them to tears without warning. A thank you note from a junior employee who felt seen for the first time. A scholar who finished school because of quiet support. A parent back home whose voice cracked with pride over the phone. These were not line items on balance sheets, yet they mattered more than any financial milestone. This was the emotional peak of the journey, not the acquisition, not the title, but the realization that success had not stripped them of compassion. It had amplified it. That power, when shaped by Filipino values, could heal instead of harm, could lift instead of dominate. One woman summed it up simply after years at the top. She said she had traveled the world, sat in the most exclusive rooms, and seen how success often hardens people. Then she paused and smiled. "I have never seen this anywhere else. Not the hunger to rise, but the desire to carry others with you when you do." In that moment, it became clear. Their wealth was real, their influence undeniable. But their greatest achievement was something far rarer. They had proven that ambition and humanity did not have to cancel each other out, and that the Philippines, through them, had quietly rewritten the definition of power. When the noise finally fades, when the meetings end and the titles no longer echo quite as loudly, something deeper remains. For these women, the journey did not conclude with wealth. It settled into something quieter and far more enduring, a sense of completion that did not come from having more, but from becoming whole. They understood, perhaps better than most, that America rewards achievement but rarely asks what it costs the soul. And yet, somehow, they emerged without losing themselves. The Philippines did not just help them survive the climb. It taught them how to carry success without being consumed by it, how to lead without forgetting how it feels to be vulnerable, how to win without needing to humiliate others along the way. Many of them reached a point where leaving a legacy mattered more than increasing numbers. They began asking different questions. Who am I lifting as I rise? What kind of world am I shaping with the power I now hold? How do I honor the sacrifices that made this possible? These questions did not weaken them, they sharpened them. What started as deeply personal stories quietly became something larger, a counter-narrative to the idea that greatness must be loud or ruthless, proof that strength can be gentle and still unbreakable, that leadership rooted in empathy can outperform fear, that faith, when lived sincerely, can coexist with ambition at the highest levels. For Filipinos watching from afar, these women became mirrors, reflections of what was always possible, even when history suggested otherwise. They did not reject their identity to succeed. They refined it. They carried the Philippines into rooms where it had never been invited before, not as an apology, but as an asset. And once there, they made it impossible to ignore. For the world looking in, their stories offered something rare. A reminder that progress does not have to erase culture, that globalization does not require sameness, that some of the most powerful leadership models emerge from places the world once underestimated. In a time when headlines are filled with division, these women stand as quiet evidence that compassion still scales, that kindness does not disqualify you from power, that resilience, shaped by hardship and guided by faith, can produce leaders who heal as much as they build. And perhaps this is the most important truth of all. Their success did not belong to them alone. It belonged to the parents who prayed without knowing how things would turn out, to the communities that believed before there was proof, to a nation that taught them how to endure, how to hope, and how to keep their hearts open even when the world was not. The richest Philippine women in America did not just redefine wealth. They redefined what it means to arrive. They showed that real power does not distance you from your roots, it strengthens them. That the Philippines, often spoken of as a place people leave behind, is in fact a place people carry forward into the future. And in doing so, they left us with something more valuable than inspiration. They left us with certainty. That no matter where Filipinos go, the values they bring can change the rooms they enter. And that sometimes, the most powerful revolutions happen not with noise, but with grace.